the performance of the Nebraska offense without Casey Thompson is deplorable. With him in the game, and that opens up Trey Palmer. You should see Trey Palmer's stats since Casey Thompson has been out. He's had games of 1 catch, 1 yard, like 3 catches, 5 yards. He hit a Purdue for 237 the week before Casey Thompson got hurt. So that gives them, even though that's, of course, playing into Iowa's strength, at least gives Nebraska better than a puncher's chance, in my opinion.
And so this past week, Thompson, again, very good Wisconsin defense, but am I correct in saying that Casey Thompson went 12 of 20 for $106?
Yeah, he didn't.
No picks, but that's a pedestrian, that's a Petrus-like game. And, I mean, look, Iowa's secondary has been great all year, but Trey Palmer, I have not seen somebody, I mean, that going back to that Purdue game, I watched that Purdue game, especially that second half, and it was just, I mean, obviously defense wasn't great, but just back and forth, Purdue hitting Charlie Jones and their big tight end whose name escapes me, and then, you know, the Trey Palmer show on the other side. So I don't think it's going to, I mean, there's the chances of this being a shootout are slim and none, and slim left town, as they say. But at the same time, I would not be surprised to see this game played into the 20s because Nebraska's obviously got holes on defense. And certainly Iowa, I mean, Iowa has not, right? That's one thing I'd say, and give credit to Iowa's defensive line. They haven't, accounted for a ton of sacks this year, Mark, but they have consistently generated pressure on opposing quarterbacks all year round. And they're so deep. We talked about that. Remember week 1, Mark? That's one thing we were absolutely right about, is we kept saying this defensive line is deep, and I don't know where the holes are going to be. And the same can be said for linebacker. And the thing about it, though, is I still think if you are Mickey Joseph, that you are trying to take advantage of Riley Moss, because he's had a good year. But I don't think teams have tested him to the extent that he could be tested. And we'll see what Mickey does. I mean, if Thompson's got, if he's healthy, I mean, it's his throwing arm, right? It's his throwing elbow.
Yes. Yeah.
So, I mean, that can certainly limit big play ability down the field. But if
it's been an elbow, it's been a hand. Thinking back to the Ohio State game, because that would be the one team that threw the ball on Iowa finally starting in like the third quarter. Was there a particular cornerback that you can think of that was picked on more than anybody else?
In the Ohio State game?
Yeah.
Well, Cooper DeJean got beat, I think, once.
On the really long one.
Yeah. It wasn't bad coverage. It's just a great throw.
Yeah.
I would say teams have more often than not picked on Cooper, which doesn't shock me because he's younger, less experienced than Riley. But we've talked even last season. There were times last season where even though Riley Moss was named Defensive Back of the Year in the Big Ten, where he bit on a couple of double moves, and I think that leaves the opening for a go route, a completion down the field, and potentially a guy like Trey Palmer making a big play. With that being said, he's obviously played exceptionally well because he's not gotten beat like that this year. He's gotten beat a time or two. He got beat against Iowa State against one of the best receivers in the country, in Xavier Hutchinson. I think he got beat. I'm trying to think who he got. Yeah, maybe he did get beat once against Ohio State, but he's been better than I expected him to be. And I think he's, after last season, I would have guessed that he would have been drafted maybe 6th, 7th round at the highest. Now I could see him being drafted. I'm a draft expert, but I could see him being a 4th round pick. That would probably be my guess at this point, 4th or 5th round pick. So I don't know. I mean, it'll just, I would guess that they'll fill out the Cooper side of the field first, but if I'm Nebraska, I'm making every effort to attack Iowa down the field. Let's also remember this, Mark, not to make excuses. And Iowa's defense has been really good, but weather has been a factor recently. And you think about the one game since Ohio State where you would expect a team to be able to hit Iowa and punish Iowa down the field. It'd be Purdue. We ain't going to do that with 50-mile-per-hour wind gusts. So Iowa was fortunate They dominated Purdue, no question about it. But Iowa was fortunate that the conditions were what they were, because that made things hard on Aiden O'Connell. Obviously, the defensive line made things hard on O'Connell. The secondary played well, but Iowa has had the elements in their favor, in my opinion, of late. Well, let me grab that. I think the forecast is pretty good for this week. I don't know if you've looked this up, Mark.
I have not.
I know you really say it.
Who do we really believe on Iowa's schedule can throw the football? Of course, Purdue, other than Ohio State, that's obvious. They may have the best passing attack in the country. After that,
nobody.
No, well, nobody's thrown the ball on Purdue, but who's capable?
Nobody.
Who's got a capable passing attack? Michigan does. Purdue does.
Well, Michigan. I mean, J.J. McCarthy's been pretty pedestrian through the year.
Yeah, but I'm just talking about a capable passing attack. Those are the two.
DeVito can throw.
DeVito's decent.
Yeah.
Yeah, those three.
I spoke out of turn. Remember I said this yesterday on our show. No, there's actually supposed to be rain in the forecast. There's potential for rain on Saturday. On Friday. So I don't know. Looks like maybe, let me look at this again. I'm going to pull up weather.com as we're talking about this. It looks like maybe that rain has pushed off more into the Saturday time frame. I'm seeing 24% Friday evening. So if it's, on Friday, it's supposed to be 47, sunny, 5 to 10 mile per hour winds. Giddy up if I'm Nebraska right now, because those are perfect throwing conditions. Your hands aren't going to freeze up. The ball will be soft. You'll have, limited wind. As long as the rain stays away, then advantage Nebraska from that vantage point. I think anything from bad conditions from that standpoint would favor Iowa. That's the other thing for Friday, Mark. Where does the offense come this Friday against Nebraska? With Sam Laporta out, you go back to that first quarter. As good as Iowa played on Saturday in the first quarter, it was almost all Sam Laporta. They had 3 receptions for receivers in the game. In the game, Mark. Bruce and Brecht. Nothing for Vines. Nothing for Reganey. 3 receptions in the game. So you're going to get a heavy dose of Luke Lachey. And you know what I'm doing if I'm Nebraska? I am following Luke Lachey. I am doing everything I can to force Spencer to put the ball somewhere else, because so far Spencer's not proven that he can consistently get the ball to anybody but his tight ends. I'm intrigued to get Greg's perspective on this rivalry, because it's obviously been one-sided in recent years, but close games. I would think that with the number of years, you brought it out at the outset, Mark, that Nebraska's not been in contention for a bowl game heading into this final game of the regular season. You would think that they'd be playing with house money. That is not translated into wins. So I'm going to continue with that viewpoint heading into Friday, that Nebraska's playing with house money. Maybe you guys will prove me wrong.
Hey, there's nothing left to play for in the season for Nebraska besides ruining Iowa's season. Nebraska has the opportunity to keep Iowa from going to Indianapolis. And I think that's the motivation. I already know that's the motivation that they're all talking about. Especially the guys on the team that are homegrown, Nebraska boys, that they don't hide it at all that they dislike Iowa. And Iowa, it's been lopsided for a long time, and especially Nebraska coming off of another heartbreaking loss against another, Big Ten West rival that they haven't beaten since 2012. That there's extra motivation especially for the seniors on this team, and the guys that have been here and haven't had the chance to taste the victory of beating Iowa. I can't even remember the last time that Nebraska beat Iowa.
Oh, I remember the last time, 2014, right? That's not.
You got to remember, I'm an old man. Okay, my memory doesn't go back that far anymore.
I remember, Mark, when Nebraska first joined this conference. I remember them dominating first 3 years, because they joined in 12. I believe they won 12. Well, maybe did they win in 13? I could be wrong on that. I think they did.
Nebraska. The
They
first
might have won the
championship game was
They
in
won-
11. Michigan
they got
State,
2 out of the
Wisconsin, and then Nebraska played in a Big Ten championship game in 12 against Wisconsin.
Which is interesting. You bring that up. That if you actually remember that, Wisconsin was awarded that game. Nebraska had beaten Wisconsin, or no, I'm sorry, that was 2012 when they beat Wisconsin. But there was, like Penn State was dealing with the Joe Paterno stuff, and
Wisconsin,
they
was
won
the
all
third
four.
place team in the division.
Right.
They went to the
third
championship
place
game.
team in the division, and they ended up going to
Yeah.
the
Went to the
title,
Rose
and
Bowl.
they smoked Nebraska.
They won the Big Ten championship.
Yeah,
Went
they
to the Rose
smoked
Bowl.
Nebraska like 63 to.
How about 70?
Okay,
70-39. There you go.
Yeah, how about that? Yeah. So.
Ohio State was undefeated, ineligible. Penn State also had a better record, ineligible. So a third place team then goes on to win the Big Ten championship and finish with an 8-6 record.
And a drunk Wisconsin fan in the elevator when I was heading to the game from the hotel actually rammed into my camera and knocked the viewfinder or the lens cap off of my camera. And I got pissed. I mean, I yelled at this guy, and he was shaking in his boots, and he picked it up and gave it to me. And
did you guys throw arms?
Well, it was a full elevator, and it was pretty much full of Nebraska media, except for these 2 Wisconsin fans. So they were outnumbered, and he was shaking in his boots.
Sounds like
don't mess with my camera, man.
So I got to ask you about this, Greg. Give us the latest health on update on Casey Thompson, because it seems like that offense goes as Casey Thompson goes.
Yeah, well, it does for sure, Casey. Casey. He'll play. I mean, he's a gamer, and the injury that he has, his elbow injury, is something that actually could pop up at any day and make his whole hand numb. But he made it through Saturday's game against Wisconsin, which was bitter cold. And everybody knows that you play in the cold, you have an injury, and those hits you take hurt a lot more than they do when it's nice out. But no, he came through unscathed, and I expect him a full go. Obviously with a short week right now, we haven't heard from anybody, from the team since the post game after the Wisconsin game on Saturday. We'll hear from those guys tomorrow, and we'll know more there. But he was fine. He was at the post game press conference, and no worse for wear. But he did mention that injury that he does have, could come back at any time. I mean, it's a day-by-day thing. And he'd actually, the games that he missed, he was actually badgering Mickey Joseph and the staff to play. He wanted to go out there and play no matter what. And it was kind of an evaluation thing, from the coaching staff, that they finally thought that he was ready to go. So, there's no setbacks. We'll just say that. So expect Casey Thompson to start the game.
Well, it's a good starting point in regards to matching up these 2 teams, because we're talking about 2 rosters that, from a talent standpoint, if you believe in recruiting rankings, are comparable, but if you believe in results and performance on the field, are miles apart. So we know that Iowa's playing for a championship. They're also a team that is just well-oiled on the defensive side of the ball. One of the elite defenses, special teams in the nation. Nebraska, to have a path in this game, we can talk psychology and incentive and flying by the seat of your pants because you just don't care and you're playing your last game of the season and all that. But this is a team that could only muster about 7 or 8 points per game in the 3 games with Casey Thompson on the sideline. And here's a guy that put up 37 on Purdue, albeit a shaky Purdue secondary, but obviously it's a viable offense with Casey Thompson. They're completely predictable and dysfunctional without him. And then it also brings into play, of course, the best player possibly on the team, and certainly the offense, and Trey Palmer. And without Casey Thompson, Trey Palmer was catching like 3 passes for 5 yards, like just dismal performances. He's taken out of the game. Casey Thompson steps on the field against Wisconsin, and even though the passing offense didn't light it up, he throws 2 touchdown passes to Trey Palmer.
And that's with the wind. I mean, if you were inside Memorial Stadium, you knew that you needed to have the wind if you were going to throw the ball whatsoever, because Wisconsin, I think they ran the ball like 52 or 53 times. I mean, that's unheard of. And the only time they actually tried to throw the ball was when they had the wind. So, obviously, the offense totally clicks when Casey Thompson is in there, and it's obvious that him and Trey Palmer have a really good relationship and really good chemistry. And you saw that. Nebraska put up 14 points on Wisconsin in the first half, and Trey Palmer caught 2 touchdown passes, and he's definitely a different player when Casey Thompson's out there. And he's definitely going to be a factor in Friday's game for sure. And with the Iowa secondary, that's a very proud group. I'm sure that Coach Ferentz has been already in their ears since probably Saturday night, talking about Trey Palmer.
And for the record, I think this game's going to be close, Mark. I could be wrong. I mean, it'd be just like, I hate to say this, Greg, but it'd be just like Nebraska to get blown out against a team with no offense in Iowa. But I do think it's going to be close. There's also rain in the forecast, a potential for rain, I think 40 to 50%. It sounds like maybe later in the day, but 3 p.m. Central start, so it's not a real early game. Finish under the lights. So I think it's going to be close, not just because of Iowa's offense and the inability to put up points, but I just, at some point, and it didn't happen last week against Minnesota, but at some point, one of these teams that Iowa has dominated for 6-7 years, literally, or more, is going to get theirs. Iowa State did it earlier this year, and ugly as that game was, Iowa State's not a good football team and found a way to go into Kinnick and win because Iowa's defense couldn't put up points directly, and the offense couldn't do jack squat. Now, obviously, we know Nebraska's defense has given up quite a bit. You mentioned the Purdue game. I mean, they must have played well. I didn't catch the Wisconsin game. They obviously played decently well against a subpar offense in Wisconsin.
Hey, Nebraska's defense put them in a position to win the game. I mean, if you get 2 first downs at the end of the game, you kill the clock and you win.
Yeah, so I mean, against Iowa's offense, Mark, who knows? I don't have confidence that I would not compare based on what I know, and especially given the fact that they were able to hold Wisconsin's run game somewhat in check this past week. I wouldn't expect Iowa to be able to even put up numbers like they did against Purdue or numbers against Northwestern. The fact that, and somebody said earlier this week, and you saw it, Mark, because I saw your response, somebody called it a trap game for Iowa. And I just can't come to grips with that concept. How could the final game of the season, that's a play-in game for the Big Ten championship game, a rivalry game, how could that possibly be a trap game? It's not a trap game. And it's a Kirk Ferentz. We're talking about a Kirk Ferentz team of all teams. It's not a trap game. Whether fans want to look past it, that's their own problem. But the players aren't looking past Nebraska.
Hey, this is a game. This is a game that we all know plays on the same day every year. It's not a. This is a rivalry game. This is for the Freedom Trophy. I mean, this means a lot to both schools. So there's no way in hell that this would be a trap game that anybody would ever think about. So,
and again, go back into recent history. Nebraska's been close almost every year. But 2 of the last 3 years, or maybe I know there was there seemed like there was blowouts like every 3 to 4 years, but every other game comes down to 1 or 2 plays. And last year, Iowa had the miraculous comeback in Lincoln, which Nebraska kind of just Nebraska'd its way out of that game.
Yep.
You had the kick from Keith Duncan. You had the kick from Miguel Racino. So I'm not saying it's going to come down to a kick. If it does, I'm pretty confident in Iowa's true freshman kicker Drew Stevens, who's been sensational since he's taken over that job. But I think Iowa fans are getting a little ahead of themselves. Again, not scared that the players are going to start thinking that way, but I think fans are looking past Nebraska and basically determine that, oh, we punched our ticket to Indy.
Hey,
Mark, can you imagine the
backlash? Nebraska's coming to play on Friday.
Yeah.
I mean, they're not laying down. I mean, this is their bowl game now. So,
can you imagine the backlash, Mark? Can you imagine the backlash if Iowa loses? We already know the backlash throughout the year because of this offense. At one point, they were 3-4, and I've given Kirk all tons of credit because the dude, he just knows how to keep his guys' heads on straight. There didn't appear to be any resentment from the defense towards the offense, and they come back and win 4 straight. And people have just already predetermined that this is a win, and Iowa's going to end up at 8-4 and in Indy the following weekend. If they lose this game and you're 7-5, and you blew your conference your division title with Nebraska at home, we're right back where we were. I mean, to some extent. So this is a big game. I was more confident in Iowa beating Minnesota last week, and I don't think fans care what I have to say, but I was more confident that Iowa was going to beat Minnesota last week on the road than I am them beating Nebraska at home. And no, it's not because it's a trap game, because it's not. But it's just the dynamic of everything. The fact that Iowa, this would be the second straight week where they've played a team in which they've historically dominated, at least over the last 10 years. And they've gotten real fortunate in this series. And I think under Mickey Joseph, Greg, you'd probably attest to this. They've done less self-destructing under Mickey than they did under Scott. Is that fair?
Absolutely. I mean, no, it's turned into the exact opposite, where guys now want to play hard and believe in themselves and believe in their coaches. I mean, that's the biggest thing that Mickey brings and Bill Busch brings is so much just the attitudes that they have and the relationships that they have with the players. It's unbelievable. And yeah, it's a totally different squad than you saw under Scott Frost. You got guys now that believe that they can actually do it. And you've seen them, ever since the coaching change was made, there's a definite change in the attitude and just the way guys play. They don't have to think as much. Everything's much more instinctual now. And, it's, for being around all these years of misery, it's actually the best cohesive unit that I've seen, offense and defense, just by what they do. Now, saying that too, I think there's a big difference in between Mickey Joseph and Mark Whipple's philosophies and what they do. And I think that with Mark Whipple calling the plays, I think sometimes Mickey Joseph doesn't agree with what he's calling. And bottom line in this league is that you've got to be able to run the ball and hold on and keep the ball and win the time of possession battle. And sometimes, Mark Whipple, I think he doesn't like to run the ball, and he puts Nebraska in a bad situation, like early in possessions and stuff. And Mickey Joseph, to me, understands that. I mean, I think bottom line, he understands that. And, we'll see going forward if Mickey stays in control of his team. I'm more optimistic than I've been, since Nebraska fired Bo Pelini. So, yeah, we're going to see. We'll have to see. And this is Nebraska's season. It ends here Friday. And the worst taste it could leave in your mouth is, if you're playing your last game and your final memory is a loss. I mean, that's got to suck. But Nebraska's going to come in. They're going to be ready to go. They're not scared of Iowa for sure, and I think it's going to be a great game. It's going to be a very close game. I don't expect a lot of scoring, but we'll see how it comes out.
All of that said, that's been the incentive now for 5 consecutive years for Nebraska, and they haven't won the game. Now, they've played very close games. And Corey, to you, I would say in regards to Iowa's concern, for me, the concern is just the style of play, and that doesn't change in any game against a quality opponent, or in this case, a decent opponent, a capable opponent. So we saw it against Minnesota. My concern for Iowa is just they play the style of play that it typically keeps it close unless they just get a rash of turnovers. But I have no concern over terms of Iowa's mindset, their focus, their fundamentals. All of that's going to be on point. I can just about guarantee it. I have all sorts of confidence in this roster and their coaches and their ability to get ready for a big game, and they know what's on the line. And then they're used to close games. They're used to the type game that we saw in Minnesota on Saturday.
Well, let me just say this, and then I gotta roll here, Mark. But Anthony Grant, I found it interesting just kind of perusing his season stats. One of his best performances was against Minnesota, which is just kind of a weird stat when you look at it because Minnesota's got one of the best rush defenses in the Big Ten. And he eclipsed 100 yards against the Gophers. So if he can run against this Iowa D, which gave up a ton of yards this past weekend, I don't think he will for the record because I think Iowa's defense will be resilient and find a way to bounce back. But Iowa has given up yards to Chase Brown, to Blake Corum, to Mo Ibrahim. If Grant can eclipse 100 yards, you're guaranteed a close game. I mean, you're not running away with it if Iowa's bending. Because the only way that I think Iowa runs away with this thing is if Nebraska can't run the football, Iowa just owns field position because the offense is just not going to make consistent drives down the field. They had a good first quarter against Minnesota. I know the Sam Laporta injury hurt. We'll see on his status for Saturday. That'll be a storyline to follow. But I have a feeling this game is going to come down to Spencer Petras and the offense needing to go down the field late. You think of the last 2 years, Mark, that Iowa's won this game. Spencer Petras has really not had to do a whole lot. I know the 2020 game. I'm trying to think. The 2020 game is a weird game. I know it's the Zach Van Valkenburg fumble recovery pick, whatever you want to call it, there at the end that kind of sealed the deal. Last year, you had the blocked punt and return by Kyler Fisher and a big run by Tyler Goodson. They've won 2 close games against Nebraska with Spencer Petras at the helm without having to march down the field, without the offense really having to go to work in a pressure situation, in a pressure cooker, so to speak. And they didn't have to do it last week against Minnesota because Jack Campbell probably should have been a pick 6, but he gets the interception, puts him in great field position. I give Petras credit and get a nice pass down the seam to Lachey, which put him in position. But Mark, we've still not seen this offense perform when under serious pressure at the end of football games. And they struggled for those final 3 quarters on Saturday. So if it's a close game like we expect, you're an Iowa fan, you better hope that this defense can come through again. And I'm certainly not going to say the defense can't because they seem to do it every week. But they better come through with a play. If Mo Ibrahim doesn't fumble, Mark, late in that game on Saturday, we're talking about having a totally different conversation here. And Iowa's its way out of games, just kind of like Nebraska has Nebraska its way out of games. So that's a wicked combination for Cornhusker fans when you have Iowa consistently finding ways to win games and Nebraska consistently finding ways to lose games.